Look how much technology he's got behind him. John,
Yeah.
have you robbed NASA at some point in
Yeah,
your life?
probably. Yes, it's
That's
all that
fantastic.
stuff up there. Yes.
So one day, what we need to do is make sure if you ever want to throw anything away, you give me and Dave first dibs because there's some serious stuff there, dude. That is NASA. Well, there you go. If anyone from NASA's watching this,
John, you're recording already.
Yeah, of course. I'm doing. Oh, well, you have to, don't you? You've got to make sure it all works. Right. Let me stop recording that bit.
Hello and welcome to the E5 podcast. I'm JW, and guest today we have Paul Meehan and David Watts, aka Sparky Ninja. And today we're going to be talking in this series about voluntary regulatory bodies. And this time we're going to be talking about the NICEIC. So I'll go to you, Paul, first. What are your sort of views on their sort of general structure and how they're actually affecting the industry?
Oh, affecting. I don't know if that's the right word, John. Affecting, influencing. I think all the voluntary regulatory bodies, and please note we use the word voluntary because they are all commercial operated entities. In the spirit of being honest and open. It's a bit of a weird one now, really. I think we should probably start off that my journey into the electrical industry started. They were the first brand that I'd heard of. Well, they weren't a brand when I first heard of them. They were gods. They were industry gods. They were the top of the tree. The NICEIC were the absolute Mac Daddy-Os. They were the kings, and to be associated with them. I remember the first time I heard about them, I was my first year of my apprenticeship with EH Finn, who no longer exist. And I remember the boss saying, "Oh, our qualified manager with the NIC, and the NIC's coming to see us." And it was like the royal family were visiting. It was that important. And there was these inspectors, and I heard all these new terms, and I was just in awe that there was an industry body that would take time out to come and see you and inspect you. And I thought, well, maybe one day I'll be worthy of their presence. They were just this awe-inspiring thing. And I think a lot of people, when you're one-man bands or electrical contractors, when you're registering with these huge multi-million-pound industries, there is a level of awe when you look at them. And I think that still exists today. However, I think it's changed considerably from 20 years ago because they were a different company then. They weren't owned by Searchshaw. You're now assessed, not inspected. So there is a slight difference in it. But for me, they still stand out as the biggest competent person scheme operator or just voluntary industry body. I don't know what term you want to use for them, really. But they're still the biggest. And I think they do a really good job for the members when they need help, like any other body would do. That's why they exist at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I wasn't with them. I was actually with Alexa, but I got sort of involved with that when the Part P thing came in. And that was the main reason for me to get involved with one of their efforts. And of course, it was separate originally, and it eventually got merged into them once it had been running for a while. And I say, as far as I got it, I just joined purely because of the Part P thing, because I only did domestic stuff. In the domestic area, 99% of customers didn't have any awareness of any of the schemes, whether it was the NIC or anybody else, and they didn't really understand the point of them existing, or even that they did exist. So, I've come to you, David. What are your views and sort of experiences on the NICEIC?
Well, obviously, I did my apprenticeship with the family firm. My granddad and my dad, and when I went to the company, it was in 1998, and they were already with the NIC at the time as an approved contractor. This is obviously all voluntary as a membership, pre-Part P. I loved the fact that I loved the certification. I loved having to, because I liked handwriting all the certs out. I did the 2391 straight away after I did my level 3, and I liked the need to take it seriously. I liked the need to take a detailed approach. But then our first negative experience with the NIC was I think it was like 2001 maybe. We just bought, or the person at the NIC sales had just sold us a stack of their certification pads. I think it was the installation of the old periodic inspection. I can't remember which one it was. And it was just when an amendment of the regulations was about to come out, and there was going to be a new version of the pads. And we were told once we bought them, about two months after, that they actually were going to be redundant and of no use from the following week. And so we tried to return them, and they wouldn't actually. They just rejected. Said no, you can't return them because they're surplus. They're no use. And we lost I don't know, a few £400 or £500 with the stock of certificate pads that we'd had. And that point on, I think it was my dad who was in charge of the company at the time. He said, no, screw it. And we left them. It was just a voluntary thing. We had a good contract with a couple of schools, race course, lots of other work thing. It wasn't in any way needed for us to do our work. And about, I don't know, a couple of years later, obviously Part P came out, and we started a domestic installer company. And we had to then delve back in to decide who to go with. So we went back to the NICEIC as the domestic installer, as a part of our company. And so I had the assessment. At this time, I was obviously, I don't know, I was probably 6 years qualified, done 2391. And I found the assessment to be fairly exhaustive. But when I left the family firm, I worked with another couple of companies as their QS. And there was one guy in particular, I remember his name. The guys who always will inspire you, you'll remember their names. I remember my 2391 teacher, Brian Moss. I remember a guy who I think still works with NIC right now called Jim Logan. And he was a good assessor. He did a proper, as Paul just mentioned, it was more of an inspection than an assessment. There was, discussions. There was opportunities to dig deeper. And his time was there to help me and to support me. And it wasn't that I was really just taking up his time. When I had further inspections later on, I always felt as if I was taking up their time. And the quicker it could go through the process, the better. When I started to get into training, I just realized that it kind of evolved that there wasn't as much, or the old inspections I used to have just weren't there anymore. It was just too quick, too rapid. The one of the last ones I ever had, I remember it specifically. I was in the office in Ascot Racecourse. I was watching the TV. He arrived. We had a coffee. I showed him the complaints folder, the regs book, the electricity at work regs, and all the stuff, all the ticks that I needed to get through from the office check. And I said, I've got 3 or 4 jobs down here, or here's a folder. We've got some other jobs. He didn't want to go anywhere. We talked the talk, and he was done. And he was on site with me in the office for about an hour and a half. And most of that, we were watching Jeremy Kyle, because that's when Jeremy Kyle was on. And I completely just disconnected from that process at the time. But building up to that point, I was fully invested in what they were doing. And they were they were the champions of industry with regards to marketing and branding. I've got DVDs of theirs. I've got books and more books and more books of theirs. I jumped on everything that they had to sell because I felt that the content was going to be supporting me and developing me. As it started to be republished, it was just obviously the same book republished with a minor change. It was obviously then, as I kind of grew up, a bit more of a money-making ploy. So to the point where probably about where are we now? 2019. Yeah, we kicked the registration with them in 2011, and I've not been registered with a voluntary body since.
Yeah, I think this whole thing about that it's voluntary can be a problem in a lot of areas because there's no compulsion to belong to any of them. I mean, even for the Part P thing, that obviously certain works are supposed to be notified, although there's obviously very few of those now. They've obviously changed that to basic consumer units and new circuits, and maybe the odd bit of thing in the bathroom. But this whole voluntary thing, and even if you want to do notifiable work, say in a domestic dwelling, it's still not compulsory to obviously belong to them or in fact any of the other operators there at all. So Paul, what are your views on that?
My last 2 rewires were done by me, and I was not registered. But I am at work but that's my company are NAPIT registered because they do a good deal and help out with the education of my fellow employees. But I've done the rewires, and I just went to the council with the certificates and all my qualifications. Went, there you go, and then basically disappeared, and then that was it. And I was waiting for a lawsuit, but I never got one, sadly.
Yeah, I remember when Part P first came in, I set up this other company, but when we kicked that out, there were some local authorities near where I lived at the time. I think one of them was Windsor and Maidenhead. We did a job, and we contacted them to tell them that we weren't registered, but we were going to do this job. It was a refurbishment for a guy who was obviously going to buy to let, and they had no idea about what to do with it. And so they said, well, and we gave them an explanation of the process, and we gave them an electrical installation certificate, And then I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks later, they even asked us how much they should charge us to log it and to add it and all of that. We just said, I don't know, £50 or something, I think we said at the time. But 2 weeks later, they contacted us again because they had another one of these come up in a couple of streets down. And they asked us to then go and inspect on their behalf. They were really unequipped for it. It does show kudos, I guess, to how well the NICIC particularly and others drove the need for their brand. I mean, we see still today, even Paul, you were mentioning earlier on, documents that were written a decade ago or even before, where the natural alignment for compliance is for the contractor to be NICEIC registered or similar. And that just obviously we still see that now as we go through.
That thing where it says you need a certificate from the NICEIC, I mean, I've seen that, and that I was sort of caught out by that a long time ago when I'd actually done some work. It was actually in a shop, and it was one where the electricity had been cut off for whatever reason because the installation was completely unsafe. So the whole thing was rewired, and then it was up to the owner, whoever, to get the electricity connected. And of course, they had to apply to the electricity company, and they knew full well it had been disconnected because the building was unsafe. And then, of course, the next thing they requested, we need a certificate from the NICIC contractual, whatever. And of course, I wasn't with them at the time, and I've never been with them actually. So then we had to go and find someone else to come in and do the tests, which we did get. And then they did do the bit of, I think it was on the bit of paper with the NIC logo on the top. But of course, even then at the time, that was like 20 years ago, I suppose. But of course, even then, it wasn't actually necessary. But basically, because that's what the electricity supplier had requested, because we went and got that anyhow. So that sort of brand awareness was definitely out there then, and I think it still is to a certain extent, certainly on the sort of more commercial or industrial side of things.
It kind of like feeds itself, because from a procurement perspective and from a client perspective, it just makes life easier if you just have that name. If you could just put NICIC, and that takes care of everything that you think it takes care of. And it helps the NIC to push the brand. So it kind of self-feeds that. But it's something that still today, we're still seeing. I mean, there are significant improvements with the inspection process from what I've seen with feedback I've been given online lately. As I say, I haven't actually had an assessment from them for a number of years now.
Yeah, I think there's been a management change recently with the NIC. Obviously, Emma Clancy was the chief exec of Searchshield. She's left. She's been replaced. And Alan Wells, who was the technical director, has now been replaced by John O'Neill. I'm fortunate. I've spoke to him a couple of times. He's very much old school, which I love, because the NIC that I grew up with loving was the old school style NIC. I'll just give you a bit of an experience. When I first got involved in the NIC, I joined a company called EDF Energy Contracting, formerly Seaboard. So everyone there was the old Seaboard mafia, for those who worked in the old electricity boards. And I basically was just there as a engineer doing fire alarms, funnily enough, and lift and escalator works. And I remember saying to my boss, right, who does all the testing? Who does all the inspection and testing stuff? And he just went, no. And this is like 2001, 2002. And I was like, well, you must have someone. We're NIC registered, surely. Oh, no. But we're EDF Energy. Of course, we're NIC registered, surely. So then I obviously used the internet and found that obviously EDF were registered, but it was departments. So EDF contracting were not actually registered, but their metering division and another division were. But the group itself, because it was so new, weren't registered. So I went back to my boss and said, we're not NIC registered. It's a requirement of various LUL standards and every other document I'd ever seen. You must NIC this, NIC that. So my boss went, oh, bloody hell, oh, that's a weird one. What are we going to do? And I went home and I literally slept. And I dreamt that there was a department called the Inspection and Testing Department with the qualified supervisors in it, because that had just changed. And went back to my boss, put the proposal to him, and he said, yeah, write it up. Next thing you know, I got promoted to project engineer, transferred working under the Health and Safety Directorate. And I was there then as a walking regs book, because I was using it every day, going around 110 station rewires trying to help Sparks. But it was an interesting eye-opener because they didn't have GS38 proving units. They didn't have test kits. So, of course, as a department, we then had to go out and procure all this and issue it and assess for competence and make sure safe isolations were done and have all the written procedures. So for 4.5 years, all I was doing was just learning the regs off by heart and developing my safe systems of work knowledge and everything else. But the first time I met Bob Kemp, God love him, he walked up to me. I'll never forget it because I met him at Elm Park Station. And he turned up in his hi-fi and NIC badge, and he said, "Hello, Sonny, I'm Bob Kemp. I'm here to inspect you. I've been told it's an assessment, but I'm inspecting you." And boy, oh boy, did he inspect me. So I had literally not slept for 4 days with nerves because I didn't want any issues found whatsoever. And I'd picked 5 stations, and those 5 stations I'd literally lived at for a couple of months before, and the 4 days I was snagging everything to death, arguing with the Sparks. Just it was a nightmare trying to get ready, but we did. I remember he stood me on the platform, he looked at a load of work, and he just went, "What's the touch voltage then on the end of this platform?" And I went, "What?" And he went, "Tell me how you work out the R2 volt drop on the volt drop on that R2." And I was just like, oh, you're good. And Sado and me actually had been looking at touch potentials for PME supplies, which went to site cabins. So I was going, right, okay, take your ZE plus this, plus that, minus this, divided by this. And he was like, all right, okay. Because I was like 24 at the time. And I think he just took, he's a young lad. Let's see what he's like. And in the end, he said, yeah, all right, fair enough. You're good enough. I need to put something on my form. And there was a fuse board that was labelled up 5 amp lighting, but the breaker was 6 amp. And it was an existing board that had been there 30 years. And he said, "Can I put that down on the sheet?" And I was like, well, no, because we haven't installed it. It's an existing LEO asset. And he said, "I've got to put something in." So I said, all right, fine. I'm not going to argue with my area engineer. And he did. And then when the report came back, my managing director pulled me in his room and he went, "Oh, we found something then." I was like, what? Well, I've tried my best. And I think for me, it was the NIC was a huge sphere of influence. I know that's a bit of a big term, but they were the first ever sphere of influence that most people get in the industry. And when you have that first influence on you, you tend to stay loyal to that sphere of influence. And for me, the NICEIC, I mean, even when I went to meet them when I was at Transport for London, I got to go into an office in their Dunstable head offices, and I met the people who wrote the Snags and Solutions books, which for anyone listening to this will know that the Snags and Solutions books were well ahead of their times. Because how many blokes, I mean, maybe on commercial industrial more, but how many times would you argue with someone about, do you earth a back box? And there you go, there's a 2-page A5 book that shows you pictures and all of the prevalent reg numbers. It was leaps and bounds ahead of its time. And if you don't mind me saying, Snags and Solutions book was the best book in the electrical industry for a Sparks, other than the on-site guide. And since then, the only book that's come near to it has been Codebreaker. I think that's why Codebreaker's been so successful, because Codebreaker has gone massively outside of that normal way of thinking. But the Snags and Solutions books were great if you had a row and you couldn't remember everything, but you knew it was in that book. You could just pick it up, refer to it, and go, "There you are, lads. We're not wrong. You know, your intuition's right." And I thought they were great books. But that was my first experience at the NIC, and I. Yeah, they didn't do me any bad. They didn't do me any bad, if anything. The repeat assessments are always firm but fair. Yeah, I mean, I got to watch Bob go into his retirement, and I think he was quite unhappy with a lot of the changes that were happening. But
yeah,
we helped him as much as we could.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some of these Snag and Solution books on my desk. I've got the earthing and bonding one. I've got the wiring systems one. Yeah, earthing and bonding.
Are they updated to the 18th edition?
Of course they're not.
No, because you don't need to. You're a walking encyclopedia.
But I mean, these are the 17th edition 2008 ones. I've got 1, 2, and 3, and I've probably used them a number of times to kind of illustrate issues on site. And I agree, they were very useful. I've also got this one was a good one. Guide to completing specialized certificates and reports. That was a good one for guidance on the fire alarms, but
I don't think it's thick enough, Dave.
It did lack comprehensive guidance, but I think that's the thing that they've always lacked is going deeper.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that takes me to a brilliant story on. Forgive me for saying this out loud to some people, but Tony Cable. The first time I ever met met Tony Cable was a phone call.
Yeah.
I was working on a station where I was reading, I think it was chapter 54 at the times. It was the generator section in the 16th edition. Forgive me for not having remembered it. But the yellow book, and it was about switching out the earthing for alternative sources. You had to have an earth electrode, you had to switch out the DNO earth, which is now just coming back round anyway. But I rang up the NIC and asked them for advice, because my intuition in interpreting the regulations was I've got a DNO supply, I've got a massive UPS downstream, 30 kVA to run all the station lighting. If I lose the mains, I need to drop out just basically by putting a contactor on the earthing conductor. It's as simple as that. If I lost my mains, that's what I'd do. So if I lost my mains, UPS would kick in. There'd be a local electrode there, which there was, because the entire room had electrodes into the platform. And then I'd just lose the DNO. And that way I didn't have any neutral currents or any protective conductor currents going up back to the DNO while they're trying to joint it and harming them. And I rang them up and I asked for advice, and I didn't get it. And eventually this bloke rang me up called Tony Cable, and I went, I know him. So I'm looking through my NIC manual, and there's a picture of him, and I was like, oh my God, he's on the phone. Oh my God. And I started freaking out. And the first thing he said to me, he said, what the bloody hell are you doing to ask questions like that? And I told him I'm doing RAL, it's really complex, blah, blah, blah. And he went, yeah, it is. And I said to him, look, am I right or am I wrong? And he went, no, go with your intuition. You're absolutely bang on. I wish to God I could come down there and have a look. And I said to him, look, you're more than welcome any time on this railway. And the weirdest thing is I still to this day say to Darren and Jake, if you ever want to come and see some funky stuff on the railways, from an electromagnetic perspective, you're always welcome. And Dave, you know, recently, which we'll probably go into in the new year, there is some really, really weird, funky stuff going on the railways at the moment, which we'll talk about in the new year. But yeah, that was my other story of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just lifting up right now. I've got my little archive of material. I've got guidebooks, Bill and Red books, from the Helpline book. This is to Amendment 1 of the 17th.
Wow,
so that's probably my newest book of theirs. Common things, the 17th edition toolbox, and I invested in all of these books, and I did find them very resourceful. This book was a bit rubbish, but this book, Electrical Installer's Guide to the Building Regulations. This tiny little book.
I had that one.
Is still, there's this book or the Green Building Regulations Guide, and the 2393 used this book. So that was pretty good. And I've got my own little library of DVDs here. I found them all very interesting. I watched them again and again and again and again. So when I think personally, where I think that a lot of issues might be where the NIC have lost their way, I probably would point mainly to training from my own personal experience.
What, their training or
more their
the general training industry?
Well, a bit of both. My experience with their training directly, because I know a few of their trainers and I've done some training for them. Their material was very good, but it's still used today. It's not updated. It's not updated much. We still will see Tony Cable in the slides, his little animation. They don't update it enough. I think it was more about the way I think one of the biggest frustrations was when they interpreted training, or they started to adjust training requirements with regards to their entry, which is something that hopefully is going to be tightened up, hopefully very soon.
Yeah, the training thing, I mean, that brings us to the next sort of topic there, which is the qualified supervisor model and how well it doesn't work. And this is the deal where you've got they go out and inspect a company, but they're only checking, say, one individual within the company to see if they're actually competent at doing the job that they're doing.
Well,
and then, of course, they could have then a whole set of other people working for them actually doing the work, and it all gets stuck back to the office, and someone just signs the bit of paper at the end of the day, which can be a problem.
You see, again, when I was first when I first got introduced to the industry and then I started to be QS, it was perfect because I was the QS and I had 4 or 5 sparks, and I would know the information of every spark. I'd know what job they were on, and I would be able to then know the timeline as to when to go to observe, and I'd obviously be in control of that. I was for one of the Mr. Electric franchises, the QS in West London. It was easy because I knew the numbers. I went for an interview with another company down in Leatherhead who had a huge amount of contracts with local authorities around the whole east of London. And I went in for the QS interview, and I got it the day I went in there. Basically, gave it to me after lunch. I then went in on the Monday to start the job, and it then came upon me as to actually how the job would go. And they showed me a nice little office. They showed me a desk, and in my inbox was something like 90 odd periodic inspections, they were called at the time. And my job was to sign them off that day. And I said, but when I first saw them, I said, is this the month? Is this the week? Oh, no. This is today, and then there'll be some more tomorrow. Oh, right. And so I went into the first 2 or 3. I said, okay, well, here's a guy. Yeah, I think his name was Charlie. When do I get to go and see him on site? When do I get to understand the way the electrician works? If he's good at this, if he's bad at this, is he fat? Is he thin? Is he black? Is he white? I don't know anything about this guy. How am I supposed to obviously assess and be able to assure his competence and his work if I can't go out and assess it? There was no time for that in the role. And I walked out that afternoon. I said, I can't do that job. It was at that point I realized how abused the QS model as it was had become. And that's the point. For small firms, it is technically a workable scenario. For the bigger companies, it's been abused.
I think it is a solution for some companies. Just going back to my first time as EDF, so I was the QS for EDF Energy, 110 London Underground stations to rewire, over £1 billion worth of rewires, and I was the QS, age 24. Now, if I looked at that scenario now, I'd just go, someone's just dropped some youngster in who's got a photographic memory on the regs. And eventually, there was 4 QSs. And it was all of London Underground rewires were divvied up, and I got all the big, complex, deep Section 12 subsurface railway stations. So I'd end up doing certificates because what I did was we ended up creating field engineers. So basically, what you had was the QSs, and then almost a sub QS who was responsible on the larger stations full time. So we'd have a full time inspection and testing overseer, who would then coordinate and act as an overseer of the inspection and testing electricians, who could then report back to me so that I could have a level of assurance, because the qualified supervisor is in the name, supervisor. Now, for small companies, it works brilliantly. In the end, by the time I'd left there, we had 4 QSs and we had a team of about 30 inspection and testing engineers, which was pretty decent when you consider it just started off with me, and in 4 years we went to that. So we were taking steps to improve things and put better controls and educate and all the rest of it. I spent most of my time rowing and arguing over silly little regs because people had bothered updating themselves. So I knew at an early age there was a problem with competence across ages in the industry. But the QS, for those who are listening, EAS specification is available from the IET website. And the document is EAS 15-362 Rev A, and it was last revised in 2015, Dave. And section 11.9. By the way, I'm not remembering this off the top of my head. Section 11.9 states requirements relating to a registered qualified supervisor. A registered qualified supervisor shall be required to have direct responsibility on a day-to-day basis for the safety, quality and technical standard of the electrical installation work carried out by the enterprise, i.e. the employer. A qualified supervisor shall be required to ensure the results of the verification process are accurately recorded on the appropriate certificates or inspection reports. Supervisory duties should be carried out in accordance with the guidance in Appendix 10. Now, it's quite freaky that doesn't actually state he's required to actually check all the certificates. But then it says a registered QS shall be required to have adequate knowledge, experience and understanding of design, construction, maintenance, verification and or inspection and testing procedures for electrical installation work in accordance with the relevant competence requirements in Appendices 4, 6 and 9. And it also says, lastly, registered QSs shall be required to have an appropriate BS 7671 qualification awarded by an accredited body within 2 years of a change to the current regulations being in effect, or demonstrate an equivalent level of knowledge.
So that's the when you think about the wording of that, I mean, 2 years of change for a supervisor.
Yeah.
How does that comply with the requirements of 7671 and requires implementation from the January date?
Yeah, well, it's just it's a thing.
I think they're going to update that, because I have on my machine a a provisional update, which is a few months old. I'm surprised it's not been updated yet.
Oh, well, sorry, I googled it. I'm using upskilling my Google competence there. But yeah, no, that's it's quite interesting when you read these basic competency requirements. For me, the most important thing is on site. My current employee, my current contractor, one of the first questions I asked when we were doing the tender interviews was, "Who's your QS?" And they would tell me, and I go, "Great, are you going to be on my route?" And they look at me and go, "Pardon?" And I'd say, "Well, if you're carrying out electrical installation work, you will have a qualified supervisor for my contract, for my route, and I expect a qualified supervisor on site. I will not accept any certification signed off by a bloke who sits in an office. Period."
Yeah,
Why would you?
let's not forget you're not the ordinary client, though, are you?
Yeah, in all fairness, not many clients sit on late at night reading these EAS specifications, but that is kind of the point of us reading these and sharing it on the podcast.
I mean, I remember when I got involved with when Part P first came out. Even the QS at the time, you had to have a 2391. So the qualifying supervisor at the time had to have the 2391 as the qualification for that. That obviously got relaxed over a number of years. And so when you think about where we're at even today or in recent years, if you're going to go through the let's just call it the rapid way to enter the electrical industry in the domestic field, that training directs you in the area of employment, self-employment. Most of those persons end up going self-employed, and when they register with these CPS or voluntary bodies, they're going to be nominating themselves as the qualifying supervisor. So they've been unable to maintain a high level of competence for that role, for that entity, because anyone who goes in self-employed by default is by nomination also a QS. Yeah. So they've been unable to maintain a high level of competence for that role.
John, when you were is it Alexa registered? Is it Alexa?
Yeah, it was Alexa.
So did you have, or were you assigned as a qualified supervisor? What model did they have? A model?
It was pretty much the NIC model. Because I say originally they weren't part of them, but fairly shortly after they were formed, they were bought out by, I think the ECA bought them, and then it was sort of all amalgamated into Searchshore and all the other suspects. So it was pretty much along the same line. So there was supposed to be a qualified supervisor, but of course, if it's just one person, like you said there, it's just you who does everything, and that's sort of how it works. So in terms of from what I was with, it was a kind of pointless thing because the qualified supervisor and the people doing the work, it was me. So it all came down to the one person. But it worked along a similar lines. They just had slightly different names for various parts of it. So they didn't have. I mean, the NRC's got their sort of approved contractor, which is supposed to be the sort of the older type, covers all of the industrial and commercial stuff and everything. And then they got their domestic installer side, which was mainly from the Part P notification thing when that came in. Alexa sort of had that, but they tended to call everybody approved contractors anyway at one point, and then they changed the definition to something else, and it was a bit load of rubbish really. But in the end, it was a similar kind of concept. So if you had, say, 5 people working there, one of them needed the qualified supervisor bit, and the other people did not. And so then it all comes down to, as with the NIC model, in that if it's run properly within the organisation, then it does work. But of course, like say yours with that job, we had to do 90 things in a day. Clearly, in that case, it doesn't work. It's just somebody who's employed to be a scapegoat, rubber stamping certificates and hoping that nothing goes wrong.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I got to a point where when I left EDF, I was working every hour under the sun. I'll happily admit that, day and night, trying to go out and help and support. And by the time I left, it got to a point where I was being told, you will sign off this, you will sign off that. And when I refused to sign it off, I would notify the chief engineer in writing, discharge me old duty of care under Regulation 29 of Electricity at Work Regs. And what we found was it was mainly the tier 1 contractors, the civil engineers, who wouldn't give us the time to do the job, or the program managers wouldn't let us do the job properly. So stuff was done in a substandard manner, which I couldn't accept. Obviously I'm not involved on the day-to-day because I had 110 station rewires. And in the end, weirdly enough, about 2 years after I left, I went to London Underground and helped mop it all up post Metronet days. There's a weird irony for you, because I knew where every single dead body was buried, for want of a better term. Which is a good thing, because it was nice to be able to highlight something, maybe not win that battle, but then win the war, where London Underground were going, yes, everything will get fixed and put right and brought into compliance, which for me was a personal moment of pride. In all fairness.
I mean, there was chatter in the select committee of the government about it, or they were trying to ask the CPSs about, is there a quantity? Is there a X amount of electricians and X QSs per X electricians? And I remember McClancy kind of just stumbling on that, trying to come up with some hypothesis or some kind of value, but it wasn't published. It wasn't a stated value. I don't know if they're going to do that in the future, or if they're going to.
I think it needs to be proportionate.
Or if they're going to lean on this individual competence and rewrite it with that instead.
I think it's got to be proportionate. I mean, I could never cope, which is why I ended up having to fight to get additional resources. But I think a lot of people, if you're not in one-man bands, struggle with resources anyway. I don't know anyone who works in the non-domestic sector who isn't struggling to get competent resources, never mind the poor old QS who they never see until the end of the job, who turns up, maybe, if they're lucky, or has to sign a certificate. I get paranoid if I see certificates with names I don't recognise, because then I don't know whether they've contributed to the technical assurance of the work's been done.
I mean, we spoke in a recent podcast with Adrian about this, and we kind of went on to the with the QS, we kind of went on to the point of if we had X amount of QSs, how is that going to carry on in the future? For example, we said in the last podcast that electricians are be broken down. We said that they're going to be rewiring electricians, fabricating electricians. So companies aren't going to want to employ more supervisors. They're going to want to try to employ the minimum. So we need to have some third party kind of regulate or enforce that instruction for contractors to actually have those increased level of skills to manage this work. Otherwise, it's just an ethical choice right now.
Yeah. To a certain extent, it is with the QSs, the good ones, the ones who'll shout. And in fairness, though, a lot of them get good support from a lot of the area engineers. The area engineers, I think, are key for most contractors. They're their inroad, their point of contact. I think, I mean, it was for me anyway, to be honest with you.
Yeah, you get good ones and bad ones, though.
Yeah, you will always get good and you will always get bad. I know that. I think the only other thing I would suggest for the NIC, which again, I'm going to be controversial here, but one of the things that we know, the industry bodies, a lot of them are going around. There's more and more training available, dates out there now. Everybody's running free events, free seminars, which can only be a good thing for the many tens of thousands of electricians who may not be able to get to every single one, or any. But the one thing that's always kind of bugged me a bit, and I have said this before, you go to a NAPIT event, you get a certificate of attendance, you get some short bite-size technical updates, and you get to meet manufacturers. The NIC do the exact same thing, but you have to pay. And I don't understand why you have to pay. And I know if they're listening, they'll say, well, someone's got to pay for it. But I hate to use them as an NAPIT don't charge.
Well, we know how much manufacturers will pay to be at those things.
Yeah, I know.
And so we know it can pay for itself.
Of course it does. Well, we did an event at, we did an event where we packed out Swansea Stadium and we didn't pay a penny for it. The manufacturers paid for the hire of the
But I mean, they have done this thing with CEF. Obviously, there's could be some monetary exchange there, but CEF account holding electrical contractors can go for free.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's been going on for the last few events of the NICs. If it's free via CEF and you get a thingy through them. I don't know how. I'm not with CEF. I don't know how it works, but I've seen it marketed that way.
It should be free to everybody. It should be free to everybody. Again, it's my personal opinion, but I genuinely think these events should be absolutely 100% free.
Yeah. Again, I mean, if you're the leading brand in an industry, you're going to carry on doing things until it's last minute when you realise there is change. And the only change that has to happen for them to change these things is when electricians start changing their registration process,
which we know is kind of starting.
It's starting, but they're still. I mean, we know very recently they're still very confident in their numbers because they're now amalgamating their numbers, though, aren't they?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah. I think Alexa. I believe the advice they're giving out now. Brace yourself, John. I think is it from the new year that they won't be taking on new registrants to Alexa brand, which to me spells the end of the Alexa brand. Although I've always been a bit miffed when Jake and Darren have always gone we're NIC and Alexa. Alexa's not really a massively known brand. NIC is an incredibly well-known, huge brand in the industry, like NAPIT. Personally, like Stromers, I was glad Stromer were gone because they were just Tesco value brand. Don't know what the hell they did, other than be the cheapest. I don't know what industry contribution they really had. But we know from the experience of what NIC have produced and what they give to their contractors. If you've ever been to an NIC Live event recently, I went to the one NIC Live South about 2 years ago. Wow, that was about 700 blokes there, standing room only. Chris Akabusi running around the room like a lunatic. It was intense. It was a massively intense time, and it was really interesting to see the way that people were walking around just in awe of being at an NIC event. It just kind of makes you realise that they do have quite a powerful influence over the industry and over their contractors. So,
I think their only weak area is in the social media area. Their online interaction, their online engagement.
It's non-existent.
Everyone's got to learn about how to do that properly, though.
But in fairness, I've spoken to them about this a little bit. They're a commercial operating company who will not engage in mudslinging or any sort of slander or character assassination. It probably doesn't help that loads of people will put pictures up online and go, and the first thing everyone says is, "Oh, it's an NIC contractor, it's a load of shit," which must mean the NIC are. No. And it's one thing we're very careful on our Instagram. We put pictures of bad work up and we say code it. We don't put pictures up and say, and which CPS did this today? Because let's just, can we go into reality corner for a second? When you see a really crap piece of work, it's not the people in the office at Dunstable of the NIC who did that crap piece of work. There's a reality check for everybody. It's not the ECA, it's not NAPIT. They don't do crap workmanship. They go out and preach, here's some education, do it right, do it right. So the way that they associate a bad electrician who wears the brand to crap work, which is something that you and I both agree on. The industry bodies, all of them, have to do something better. Now, I know there was this view of keep them on board and train them up. Personally, I would name them, shame them. I'd put them on a public register of contractors who've been slung off. Especially if they're doing hazardous, dangerous work, where we know Adrian, he found some horrendous work done by a contractor, not NIC, where that person should have been publicly named and shamed.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out that whichever scheme that people belong to, there's always going to be bad people out there that do rubbish work, whether they belong to the NIC or NAPIT or anybody else. And so that's just inevitable.
And it's worth mentioning that the NIC have the biggest collective.
Yeah.
So if you're going to have a collective of good sparks, they're most likely going to be the NIC. Have a collective of shit sparks, they're most likely going to be NIC. It's just numbers. That's all it is.
Yeah, if we go back to the branding thing with Alexa and I'd say even when I was with Alexa, which was several years ago, even then it was all dual branded with the NIC logo and everything. And like emails you got through, quite often they were just branded with NIC and not Alexa, and so it was already going in that direction. So I'm quite surprised they've kept the Alexa brand as a separate thing for so long. It would seem fairly pointless to have it because essentially it's doing exactly the same thing as the NIC one does. So
I should imagine when they purchased it or they obtained it, there was a license that they've just had to wait to wither and die. Or there's some kind of agreement that they've just had to wait for its life to expire. And it makes no sense. They need to start focusing back on their original brand, build the strength up and get the integrity back to where it is, or where it was when we bought all this stuff from them.
So let me ask you a question then. If you had to be, let's say all of us get pumped tomorrow from our jobs, which actually, no, hang on, I've missed that was a rubbish question because technically you can't sack yourself, Dave. Or can you, John?
Oh, no,
right. Sorry, I'm an employee. Okay, right, let's pretend hypothetically we all work for T. Clark's. We're all electricians for T. Clark. We've all been pumped and we've all decided to set up our own electrical contracting company. Who would you register with and why?
I get asked this question a
Do you?
lot. Yeah. And my immediate response is to go back to whoever asked me the question, and it's down to their clients. NICIC still opens more doors, gives you more opportunities on the branding. And if you're reliant on that opportunity, then I'll always strongly suggest the NIC over that in the interest of the clients and that electrician. If the electrician has an existing flock, isn't in any way interested in anything else, I then go, well, what value are you going to get from your membership? I know NAPIT offer great value in the membership. I was with the NIC, but I had to buy everything still when I was with the NIC. I mean, saying that, the code breaker, you've got to buy that. And, you know, NAPIT, you do have to buy stuff. I'm not with NAPIT, so I don't know what you get for free with their membership. Do you know, Paul, what you get with it?
So
you get events.
So, well, the events and seminars are free to anyone who books them anyway. You get discounts on training, discounts on their insurance brand, access, obviously, to their technical helpline, which are all old boy retired Sparks. You get their Competent Person magazine, which is actually, I have to say, it's actually really good. Of all the magazines, I find it the most technical information.
I don't get that. I don't get it, but I've got one. When I trained at their place in Bristol, I picked up 2 copies. It was very interesting.
If you message Mike, and he'll get you on the and send them to you, because I find of all the magazines, because I get the ECA magazine, every single one that comes out, and that's so I'm very fortunate. I get all of the trade body press sent to me. And what I found is the ECA magazine is very tailored to specifiers, clients, high level, strategic, carbon, really high level stuff. And the NIC stuff and the NAPIT stuff is purest technical articles to problem solve or refresh knowledge around certain things. And that's where they should stay. But I've just found that the Competent Person magazine is just really good. The way it's put together, whoever does the authoring and the writing of the stuff is very good. In all fairness.
So back to your question, Paul. It depends on what they want or what they need. If they want value, then it's a case of looking at exploring what value the CPS give you back. I know a lot more about NAPIT's value than the NIC right now, but I've not really spent time to look at what the NIC offer, to be honest, these days.
Yeah, for me, it would probably be NAPIT, mainly because I only do domestic stuff. And as I said previously, in terms of ordinary domestic customers, there's no real awareness of any of the schemes at all. And say, in terms of NAPIT, probably slightly better in some ways, but it's not a huge difference really, because it basically comes down to notifiable work, which
that's the thing. They all do the same one function. You know,
in the end, it's the same: filling in the form and pressing send and paying whatever price is. So.
And to me personally, it wouldn't change in any way the way I do work. It would just be a badge that would be on things that people want it to be on. And it would just be an easy way to provide registrations. It might even be their method of notification that I look at, how easy it is to get that bit out of the way, really.
Okay, well, I think we've covered most of the stuff there. Any sort of final thoughts on the NIC and their ways?
So I've got one bit to add. If I was, again, just to finish that off, because we missed me, if I was to register, I would be with NAPIT. But the only reason I would do that is because, based on our recent experience over the years, where they've been nice and friendly towards us and have engaged with us on social media, face to face. I mean, the first time I met Mike Andrews was following a meeting with the NIC, and he came to my house. So I was living in Hertfordshire, and he got on a train and turned up to my house. This is a true story. It was Richard Townsend's first day at NAPIT, and he dragged him along to my house at 8:30 in the morning. My missus was going out the door, and she went, "Who the hell are you?" And he was in a suit. He went, "I'm Mike Andrews," and they sat in my house for half a day, just talking to me, telling me about NAPIT and all the rest of it. And I thought, do you know what? If the chief exec of an organisation could come to little old me's house and drink a cup of tea and be open and honest and humble, then I like that. And we've always had a respectful relationship where we can say good and bad. Since we started E5, we know the ECA and the NIC have kept a distance from us because of other persons on social media and maybe some of the ways we've questioned things. But the one thing that you mentioned very briefly, Dave, it gets you specified, doesn't it? When you're in the NIC, it gets you specified as a contractor. Now, one of the things that I've opened again, this is the E5 for me now, that honesty, integrity, under the procurement directive of 2015, which is a legal law. You can't specify a certain brand.
Yes, but again, you are a very unique client. You are unlike 99% of other clients.
Oh, that's true. That is true.
And you need to think about the electrician himself or herself, who needs to agree or bend over to the
listen, as a Sparks, I mean, if I didn't have the knowledge I had now, and you said to me who you're registering with, I'd be NIC all day, every day of the week, without a doubt, because my past experience with them was nothing but good. They looked after me, and I think what they're doing for the members now is better than what they were doing when I first registered them with them. But that's based on what, if I didn't know what I know now, to be honest with you, as a client. But at the end of the day, they're all, as you said, they're all equally as good or as bad. It depends on the experiences and the people you speak to. As I said before, the NIC, the ECA, JIB, NAPIT, they're not the ones doing any bad. They're not doing the bad workmanship or the bad install. Could they be doing more to help the electricians?
Yeah, there is an argument against that. I mean, we had obviously the recent podcast where we talked about what the JIB have done. True. In Steve's tenure, and then you talked about the rates. When companies claim to do something for the electrical industry, we must hold them to account if they don't do it. Or if they don't do it well enough.
But that's the difficult conversation to always have. How do you say, I'm sorry, I'm really, really disappointed with what you've done and how you've treated the industry and electricians, and expect them still to talk to you?
I know.
It's a bit of a sore point, isn't it? Really.
But again, I mean, we've got a collective of electricians that are very passionate, and the NIC in particular have felt the wrath of many of these of a lot of this passion. But some of these electricians are just deregistering themselves altogether.
Which is their prerogative. It's their prerogative at the end of the day. But it's 2020 now, so I think if we're ever going to try and improve the industry, we've all got to take small steps. Every single one of us, regardless of what our past frustrations and annoyance has been.
As we said with the podcast with Adrian, the last thing E5 wants to do is become another one of these UCAS accredited CPS strategies.
So when I throw my UCAS application in the bin, then I'm joking.
When I think of CPS and people say, "Oh, CPS," I can't help but think they're just doing what's been asked of them. You've got the electrotechnical assessment specification, but the UCAS part of it is what I have to look at.
Well, I'll tell you what I want. I want an industry body. I won't use the term scheme. I want an industry body to step up and lead our industry, and lead it for the right reasons in the right way, not just, where can we get the money out of the industry the best? How can we upskill people? How can we support them in every endeavour that they attempt to do? And I think the industry is way too fragmented at the moment. Maybe it's because we have too many industry bodies.
We have too many industry bodies, but I think we also have too many people in the industry.
In the industry is what not Sparks, but as in the management.
Authorised to access the industry. Authorised workers, whatever you want to call them.
Oh, okay. Well, we're not stopping this now. Okay, go on. You've got to go into that. Or do we do another podcast?
I mean, domestic installers having prices driven down. I mean, we saw a tweet this afternoon from Lee Ward, who's going through some real hard times, bless him. But he amongst others has always tried to exercise the highest levels of workmanship that he can do. Yes, but every time he puts a price in, he's wearing the same badges as another electrical, a registered, authorized person, whatever you want to call them, who doesn't appreciate that level of workmanship and undercuts him. Yeah. And again, from my experience in the training industry, I said this in the previous podcast, instead of having this generation retire with this generation enter, we now have a whole new flock of authorized electrical installers, authorized domestic installers, call them what you want. They're entering the industry, and some of them are only putting a little bit of value into the industry, and they're undercutting, and they're pushing things downward.
Just to add a little bit to Lee Ward's challenges he's had with the industry. Lee Ward, God bless him, is a man of absolute integrity. He does very good workmanship. He will always, he's a very humble man, and he's been very frustrated, and bless him, he has gone publicly and privately to industry bodies wrote a very good article in Pro Electrician the other month, and he has an absolute undying passion to want the industry to improve and the industry bodies, and he hasn't had a good experience with the industry bodies. But saying that, that was a past industry body, if that makes any sense, and it's new people, new times, new world. It's 2020. I hope, for his sake and for everybody's sake, that the experiences that Lee has isn't repeated again in the future, or there are lesser occurrences, because the industry bodies are learning and improving.
Again, the problem, like we released tweet this afternoon, the problem is they've all got the same marks on them, and the clients are looking for the same marks. So unless the people who own those brands or own those marks actually then speak to the public and speak to the clients about what to expect from those brands, what to expect from those marks, then we do need a new industry body that has a completely different level of representation.
Well, I would love to see a public debate where, and I mean this, I would love to see a public debate where all of the industry comes together to talk about what are we going to do with the bad eggs in our industry. People who shouldn't be authorized to access a domestic installation. What are we going to do about them? And
remember what I said in the last podcast, flush them out.
Yeah, I know. But I think it'd be good if an industry bodies could lead that. And I still have high hopes that the NIC and NAPIT and all that lot can get together, bang their heads together, drop their commercial models for a period of a number of weeks or months, whatever long it takes, and do what's right by the industry would be great. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me, really.
Okay, yeah. So when I was with Alexa, I didn't have any problems with them, and I only picked them because the name was vaguely in the line of being electrical, and that was it. Because there was zero awareness amongst like the domestic customers about whether it was even needed or not. So I thought,
it made marginally more sense for your customers that it was about electrics.
Yeah, because at least it sounded sort of electrical, and that was it. And ultimately, the only other choices then were all basically the same anyhow. It was just what label you had to put on the bit of paper. So. That was it. And I'm not with them now, mainly because I stopped doing notifiable work. So there wasn't any point. So that was it. So
yeah, I think for anyone listening to this who's wondering who would I go with the ones who will give you the best support for what you need.
Value.
Yeah. You know, a lot of people went with Stroma because they were the cheapest in the industry. They didn't care about the bells and whistles.
That just showed you, though, what a lot of people thought about them altogether to go with the cheapest.
Yeah, but then again, I think a lot of people went to Stroma as well, almost as a protest as well, to a certain extent with their frustrations, because Stroma had like 10,000, I think it was just under 10,000 members when they got bought out, and 10,000 people going there purely because of money. Did they not perceive value from the others? I don't know. To be honest with you, I mean, for me, I would pay the money if I got the value and the benefit, and my business could justify it. And for a lot of people, it's just about the winning the work, which is NICEIC win every time.
And let's remember that this is one of many other methods of sucking money away from the Sparks. You know, there are so many other different entities that are trying to suck the life out of a working electrician just to actually do his graft or her graft. So it is, you know, when someone decides on a CPS, money will come into it when they think about everything else they've got to every annual period pay out for what they may foresee to be an unnecessary expense.
Fair enough.
Yeah, the money thing, I don't think Stroma was, I mean, obviously it was cheaper, but in the scheme of things, it's 200 quid a year less is not really a massive sort of big saving for anybody who's doing it full time. So obviously there were other reasons, but as Stroma now gone effectively, it's somewhat irrelevant there. Well, I think this has gone on for quite long enough, hasn't it? So any final points to add there, or are we pretty much done on this one?
No. Thanks for having us, John.
I think 2020 is going to be an interesting year. I think we're down to 2 technically now, with Alexa merging away. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Speaking on the E5's behalf, though, let's just remind everybody that we will always, and I said this to Darren and Jake at CEF in a cracky Coventry, I think it was, wasn't it, at the CEF Live. Anytime that they do something that we see as being in the interest of the industry, in the interest of working electricians, I will always, either as Sparky Ninja or with E5, if E5 all agree with it, stand up and next to NIC and agree and work alongside it.
Dave, definitely. I think only about 6 months ago I put on Twitter that I thought that the NIC on-site guide was far better than the IET stuff. credit was due on that. It is a far
Yeah, the
superior
NSI
document
guide's a
to-
good guide.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's far better than the IET one. The IET one's pants in comparison, to be honest with you. So yeah, no, credit is due where it is due. And yeah, we'll be happy to do stuff with the NIC at any point. We're always going to go to these events. As Dave, you know, we went to our first early elect shows to go there to support industry bodies. Hopefully, maybe this year we'll be doing stuff with them. I mean, last year we got to stand up in the Nappet Arena and do our own little talks. And hopefully, I don't know if we'll be doing every single elects this year. I think we'll probably all split up and do the ones nearest to us. But yeah, let's see what the year comes to, I suppose.
Yeah, you're gonna have to publish this one fairly early in the year now, just so you know.
Yeah, this will be
before
out
Ali Pali.
This will be out second or third week of January.
All right.
I think this will be, hopefully.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for your time this evening, gents, and I'll speak to you at the next one.
Yeah. Thanks, JW.
Okay, well, I say I'm JW, and you've been listening to the E5 podcast. And thanks for listening this time. Plenty more to come in the future.
Bye.